Sometimes the greatest betrayals begin not with an act of evil, but with a simple misunderstanding fueled by fear. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone jumped to the wrong conclusion? Share your story with us in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in the quiet suburb of Brookridge, Missouri, the kind of place where the biggest excitement usually came from a new bakery opening or a neighbor putting up Christmas lights a little too early. My name is Marcus Reed, and back then, I kept to myself more than most. I worked remotely as a freelance designer, preferred the company of books to block parties, and lived alone in a modest two-story house tucked between neatly manicured lawns and white picket fences. I wasn't looking for trouble. That day, I had just finished a long morning of video calls and deadlines, the kind of day where the hours blur together in a fog of emails and muted conference calls. My internet had been giving me grief all week. Slow speeds, dropped connections, and a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I decided to take a short break and troubleshoot the issue. Sitting on my porch for a better signal, I pulled out my phone and opened my router settings. That's when I noticed it. An unknown device connected to my Wi-Fi labeled, not with random numbers, but with something deliberate, Brookridge IV1. It stood out like a thorn in a garden. I lived alone, didn't hand out my password, and wasn't the type to borrow tech-savvy kids from down the street. Something was wrong. Without thinking twice, I started removing the unknown device, resetting my password, and strengthening my network security. That's when I caught the prickling at the back of your neck, when you know you're being watched. Across the street through the parted curtains of her kitchen window stood my neighbor, Linda Patterson. Linda had always been a little too interested in everybody's business, always quick with a wave but quicker with gossip. She was watching me now, suspicious eyes narrowing as if I were committing some invisible crime just by standing there, tapping on my phone. I didn't pay her much mind. I was too focused on locking down my network, tightening every loose screw in the digital fortress I had built to keep my life private. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have guessed, was that in Linda's mind the story had already been written. She wasn't seeing a man fixing his Wi-Fi. She was seeing a threat, a mystery to be unraveled. And in her rush to protect the neighborhood, she was about to light a match she couldn't put out. I was still crouched near my front steps, tapping away on my phone and making sure every security measure was properly reset, when I first heard the distant wail of sirens. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Sirens were rare in Brookridge, but they happened from time to time. A minor fender bender, a health emergency, maybe even a loose pet. Causing a fuss, I figured they were headed somewhere else. But when the flashing lights slowed down and a black and white squad car pulled up right in front of my house, my stomach sank like a stone. Two officers stepped out of the vehicle with the kind of deliberate movements that put you immediately on edge. The taller one had a sharp, angular face and a purposeful stride that screamed authority. His name badge read, Detective Sean Navarro. His partner, Officer Emily Carter, was shorter, but no less commanding. Her stance firm and her eyes scanning everything as if she was sizing up the entire block in one sweep. I stood up slowly, hands visible, keeping every motion calm, because I knew how these things could spiral with just one wrong move. "Sir," Navarro called out, his voice steady but carrying that weight of command. "We received a report of suspicious activity at this address. Can you tell us what you're doing?" Suspicious activity. In my own front yard, I fought the urge to let my frustration show, swallowing it down with the steady patience that life had taught me to keep ready for moments exactly like this. "I'm changing my Wi-Fi password." I said, my tone even, but edged with disbelief. Navarro and Carter exchanged a brief glance, that quick, silent conversation experienced officers have. Before either could say more, a shrill voice cut through the tension. "He's lying." I turned, and there she was. Linda Patterson, standing boldly on her front porch, arms folded tightly across her chest like some self-appointed sheriff. He's always out there doing something sneaky with that phone. I've seen him looking around, tapping away, lurking like he's casing the place. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but one look at Navarro's tightening jaw told me humor wouldn't help here. Instead, I stayed rooted where I was watching this circus unfold like some out-of-body experience. "Ma'am," Officer Carter said, stepping slightly toward Linda, "do you have any evidence that Mr. Reed has committed a crime?" Linda's face faltered for a split second, and that tiny crack told me everything. I, I don't know," she stammered. "I just know it looks wrong." Navarro exhaled slowly, clearly, fighting the urge to roll his eyes. He turned back to me, more cautious now. "Sir, would you mind if we took a quick look at your device settings, just to clear this up?" My gut twisted. I shouldn't have to. I was standing in my own driveway minding my own business, but the way the air had shifted heavy with assumptions and expectations told me there was no easy way out. Reluctantly, I unlocked my phone and pulled up the router settings. "Here," I said, holding it out. "See for yourself." Navarro leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen, and the moment he saw the strange device labeled Brookridge I-01 still connected to my network, his expression changed. Slightly, at first, but enough to tell me that this wasn't about a misunderstanding anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger, something none of us were ready for. Detective Navarro narrowed his eyes at the strange label flashing on my phone screen. Brookridge I-01 wasn't just some random glitch or neighbor kid piggybacking on my network. It was too deliberate, too structured. Officer Carter leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "Do you know whose device that is?" she asked. I shook my head firmly. "No, I live alone. I've got my phone, my laptop, my TV, and nothing else connected." Navarro nodded thoughtfully, then pointed to the activity logs. "Can you pull those up?" I navigated to the logs, my fingers stiff from the tension running through my arms. As soon as the screen loaded, a chill raced down my spine. The unknown device hadn't just been connected, it had been actively accessing data streams non-stop for days. Navarro's expression tightened as he leaned in closer. "This isn't just someone stealing Wi-Fi," he said grimly. "This device is pulling massive amounts of data." Carter's voice dropped a notch, her tone more serious. From what I clicked further, opening more logs. As the information spilled out, my stomach turned. It wasn't browsing data. It wasn't downloads. It was video streams specifically, security camera feeds from inside my house. Every private moment, every unguarded second quietly siphoned off through my own network. "They're watching," I muttered, barely able to believe the words coming out of my mouth. Carter's eyes darted to Navarro, alarm flashing between them. "Watching you?" she asked. I nodded. "And not just me." I tapped into more logs, opening access points one by one. My heart sank deeper with every click. Multiple addresses, multiple names popped up. Neighbors' houses I recognized from evening walks and friendly waves across the street. Whoever was behind this wasn't content with spying on me. They were watching others too. From her porch, Linda's face shifted from smug triumph to a confused, unsettled frown. "Wait, what do you mean, watching?" she called out, the bravado draining from her voice. I turned slowly to face her, the weight of what I was about to say crashing down harder than anything she could have accused me of. "I mean, someone's been inside our homes without ever stepping through a door," I said coldly. "They've been watching you, Linda, watching your family, watching all of us." Silence swallowed the street thick and suffocating. Linda paled, the realization washing over her with terrifying clarity. Her mind had been so fixed on seeing me as the problem, she never thought to consider the real danger could be lurking somewhere else, much closer than she dared imagine. Navarro straightened up, his entire posture shifting into full detective mode. All right, he said, his voice clipped and sharp. Let's get inside. I want a full view of what we're dealing with. Without another word, I led them into my house, the bitter taste of injustice thick on my tongue. I hadn't even done anything wrong yet. Here I was forced to expose my life, my privacy, just to prove my innocence, while the real intruder remained hidden in plain sight. Inside my house, the atmosphere was thick with tension as I mirrored my phone's router settings onto my laptop, projecting the data onto a bigger screen for everyone to see. Detective Navarro and Officer Carter stood behind me, their eyes fixed on the display as I navigated the network logs. Linda, who had reluctantly followed us inside, hovered awkwardly near the door, arms crossed tightly across her chest, as if she could shield herself from the growing dread pressing in on all of us. I clicked through the activity reports, each log revealing more evidence that someone had been systematically tapping into not just my security feeds, but feeds from other homes along the street. Streams of video footage, timestamps, matching late-night hours and early mornings, chilling proof that whoever was behind this invasion had been watching families sleep, children play, couples argue and laugh within the supposed safety of their own walls. Navarro's face darkened as the implications settled in. "Can you tell where the data is being sent?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. I hesitated, then nodded. "I can try," I said, launching into the IP tracing tools buried within my router settings. My fingers moved quickly, the keyboard clicking softly under the heavy silence. After a few minutes, I pulled up a list of outgoing IP addresses. One in particular stood out, not a distant server in some foreign country, not even a city away. It was local. Painfully local, pinging from less than a block away. Navarro leaned in, his jaw tightening. "Where exactly?" he asked. I mapped the connection, strength triangulating the signal, my heart hammering against my ribs as the results narrowed down. When the final address appeared, I stared at it for a long moment, unable to process the simple, brutal truth. It's right down the street," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Linda took a step forward, her face crumpling into a mask of denial. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "No, that can't be right." I turned the laptop toward her so she could see it for herself. Her eyes widened in horror as she recognized the address I didn't need to ask. I saw it hit her like a hammer to the chest. The house wasn't some stranger's. It wasn't a rental property or an abandoned building. It was the house she lived in. More specifically, it was her nephew's room. Brandon Foster, the quiet college kid she had taken in a few months earlier. The same, Brandon who rarely came out except for meals, who spent hours locked away behind a glowing computer screen. Navarro caught the address and stiffened. "We need to move," he said sharply to Carter. Linda swayed slightly, her face drained of all color. "Brandon," she whispered, as if speaking the name aloud might make the nightmare dissolve. But deep down, we all knew. The real threat hadn't come from outside the neighborhood. It had been hiding among us the whole time, right under our noses. Linda's hands trembled as she led Detective Navarro and Officer Carter down the street toward her house, each step heavier than the last. I followed at a distance, my fists clenched tight at my sides, every muscle in my body coiled with a tension I couldn't shake. The evening sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the perfectly trimmed lawns and spotless driveways of Brookridge, but the warmth of the day had long since faded. A cold pit had settled in my stomach. Brandon Foster, quiet, polite Brandon. I couldn't believe it, and yet, somehow the pieces were clicking together, too neatly to ignore. Linda paused at her front door, fumbling with the keys before pushing it open and calling out, her voice shaking. "Brandon, can you come downstairs for a minute?" No answer. Navarro exchanged a glance with Carter. The silent communication of professionals who knew when things were about to go sideways. Without waiting for permission, they moved into the house. their footsteps firm against the polished wood floors. Linda stood frozen by the door, hugging herself tightly as if trying to hold her entire world together. We made our way upstairs, the creak of each step loud in the suffocating quiet. Navarro knocked sharply on the door at the end of the hall. "Brandon Foster, this is the police. We need to speak with you. Open the door." Still no response. Then the faint sound of movement. A chair scraping, hurried footsteps, and finally the door cracked open. Brandon stood there, disheveled, his face pale, his hands twitchy and nervous. His eyes flicked between Navarro Carter and Linda, calculating his next move. "What's going on?" he asked, voice strained. Navarro didn't waste time. "We have reason to believe you've been accessing unauthorized surveillance feeds through compromised Wi-Fi networks in this neighborhood." Care to explain? Brandon's face twitched, the corners of his mouth pulling tight. "That's ridiculous," he said quickly. Too quickly. Carter stepped forward. "Mind if we take a look at your laptop?" Brandon stiffened his body language, screaming guilt even as his mouth said, "You don't have a warrant." Navarro's tone hardened. "We can get one, but right now, we're giving you a chance to tell us the truth." A long, heavy pause stretched between them, the air crackling with tension. Finally, Brandon's shoulders sagged. "It was just a joke," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to see if I could break into a Wi-Fi network. That's all. I didn't mean for it to get this far." Linda gasped softly behind me, her hands flying to her mouth. "Brandon," she whispered, but he didn't meet her eyes. Navarro pressed in. "So you admit you hacked into the networks?" Brandon nodded miserably. "At first it was just Wi-Fi," he said. "But then I found the camera feeds. I got curious. I didn't think—" He trailed off, realizing there was no excuse that could make it right. Carter's voice was cold now. "Curious doesn't cover it. You invaded the privacy of dozens of people. You watched them in their homes." Brandon flinched visibly, shrinking in on himself. There was no more hiding, no more justifying. The betrayal hung heavy in the air, a wound that words couldn't heal. Brandon's admission hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Not Linda, not the officers, not even me. It was as if the entire house itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to break the unbearable silence. Officer Carter moved first, stepping forward with a grim finality. She pulled a pair of handcuffs from her belt, the metallic click of the cuffs unlocking loud in the otherwise dead quiet hallway. "Brandon Foster," she said clearly, "you are under arrest for unauthorized access of computer networks and unlawful surveillance." Brandon's face turned ghostly pale, his lips parting as if he wanted to protest but no words came out. He didn't resist when Carter grabbed his wrists and cuffed him. He just stood there, slack and defeated, like the weight of his own actions had finally crushed whatever bravado he thought he had left. Linda staggered back against the wall, her hands trembling so violently she had to clutch the doorframe for support. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from shock, but from a profound gut-wrenching guilt. This boy, her own blood, the one she had defended, housed, and trusted, he had been the true threat all along. And yet she had called the police on me, a man doing nothing more than trying to protect his privacy. As Carter led Brandon past her, Linda reached out a shaking hand, but Brandon didn't even glance at her. He kept his eyes locked on the floor, his shoulders slumped, as if he knew he no longer had a place in this home or maybe anywhere else in Brookridge. Navarro lingered behind his expression, carved from stone, before turning to me. "You were right," he said quietly. "If you hadn't caught this, we might never have known." I didn't respond right away. I just stood there watching as Carter guided Brandon out the door and toward the waiting squad car, the flashing lights throwing long, distorted shadows against the pavement. Finally, I spoke, my voice low but firm. "Funny thing, I said, my words slicing through the thick air. I was standing in my own driveway fixing my own Wi-Fi, and I'm the one who got the cops called on me. Linda winced visibly, her shoulders hunching inward as if she could make herself disappear. She tried to find her voice, tried to form the words, but all she managed was a choked whisper. "I was wrong," she said. "I was so wrong. I assumed the worst because I didn't know you. And that was unfair. It was wrong." I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened press down on me. I could have unleashed my anger. I could have made her feel even smaller than she already did, but I didn't. Instead, I shook my head slowly and turned toward my house. "I don't need an apology," I said over my shoulder. "Just do better." And with that, I walked away, leaving Linda standing alone in the gathering dusk, left to reckon with the wreckage her assumptions had helped create. The squad car pulled away slowly, its red and blue lights casting eerie flashes across the otherwise quiet street of Brookridge. I stood for a moment on my porch, watching until it disappeared around the corner, taking Brandon Foster and a piece of our neighborhood's innocence with it. Linda remained where I had left her, slumped against the frame of her door, her figure small and hollow in the deepening twilight. I didn't linger to watch her wrestle with her guilt. I had my own thoughts to sort through. I stepped back inside my house and closed the door behind me with a soft, definitive click, shutting out the echoes of the day. The living room felt colder now, despite the warm tones of the setting sun bleeding through the windows. I sat down heavily at the dining table where my laptop still rested, the router settings still open like a wound that refused to close. I stared at the screen, at the device logs, and the damning evidence they held, and let the silence settle around me. It would have been easy to feel triumphant, to feel vindicated after everything, but I didn't. What I felt was weariness, a profound and lingering sorrow that clung to my bones. This wasn't just about Brandon or Linda or even me anymore. It was about how easily fear and suspicion had twisted the truth. How a neighbor I barely knew had seen me standing quietly in my own yard and decided I must be a threat simply because she didn't understand me, because she had never taken the time to try. Outside the neighborhood, lights flickered on one by one, illuminating the rows of tidy houses where so many people lived side by side yet remained strangers. I wondered how many of them had heard the sirens, seen the flashing lights, and assumed the worst about me before the truth came out. Assumptions have consequences. It's easy to tell ourselves we're just being cautious, just protecting our homes and families. But caution without understanding turns quickly into something far uglier. It blinds us to reality. It damages trust before it even has a chance to form. And sometimes, like tonight, it puts the wrong people under suspicion while the real dangers slip by unnoticed. I powered down the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't change how people thought overnight. But maybe, just maybe, this would be a wake-up call, a reminder that judgment should never be the first instinct. Listen first, observe. Question your biases. Maybe then we wouldn't have so many Lindas seeing threats, where there are none missing the ones hiding in plain sight. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath, feeling the tension finally start to bleed from my body. Tomorrow would come. Life would move forward. And while the scars from today would take time to heal, they would serve as a constant reminder of the lesson we all should have learned long ago. Real danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the dinner table,